In a recent legislative committee hearing in Frankfort, it was discovered that Fayette County Public Schools has a spending problem. Fayette County Superintendent DeAndre Liggins testified in front of a joint committee on education earlier in the month, and he admitted that some of what they have going on there are budget issues. Hi, this is Richard Nelson, host of the Commonwealth Matters. And joining us to talk further is State Senator Lindsey Tichenor, who's a member of the Senate Education Committee. She was also part of that conversation, and she is going to help shed some light on what is going on, not just in Fayette County schools, but in other school districts across the Commonwealth. Lindsey, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, again, super appreciate you joining us on short notice. We were at an event yesterday, and I shared with you that I saw just a snippet of your participation in this joint education committee hearing, and I was floored by some of the things that you had to say, some of the things that your colleagues had to say, in particular about where the money is going in Fayette County schools. I want to just say this at the outset. I am not approaching this program as just coming down against public education. We're not here to make anybody look bad or to ridicule anybody, but I'm coming at this program as a taxpayer and as a concerned citizen, in insisting that our tax dollars are spent appropriately and wisely. And Lindsey, would it be fair to say that's how you're approaching this too?
100%. The one thing big problem we have in Kentucky are the scores of our education system and what is really happening at the classroom level. Our students being educated. Obviously, that's the purpose of our education system. And instead, we're seeing continually decreasing scores that or just consistently low scores in the failure range and always a constant request for more money. That's always the ask, that there's never enough money. So when you really look under the hood and you see where some of this money's going, you realize that it's not benefiting the classroom or the student in any way.
Yeah, well, let's start with the scores. Of course, the NAEP, the National Assessment of Education Progress, this is considered the nation's report card for K through 12 students. Not doing very well here in Kentucky on the NAEP, or nationally for that matter. There has been consistent decline year after year when it comes to math and reading scores in particular. There's another assessment that I just became aware of as I prepared for this program. It's called the Kentucky Summative, is that right?
Yeah.
Assessment, the KSA. And
Yes.
here's the results for Fayette County Public Schools. In reading, elementary school students in Fayette County, they're proficient in reading, 28% of the students. There's in middle school, 27% of the students are proficient in reading. And in high school, again, 27%. In other words, that means 72% of elementary students, 73% of middle school students, and 73% of high school students are not proficient readers. Look at the math scores. According to the KSA survey or testing, elementary students in the Fayette County schools, 29% are proficient in math, 26% of middle school students are proficient in math, and 21% of high school students are proficient in math. And again, that means that 71% of elementary school students, 74% of middle school students, and 79% of high school students are not proficient in math. Lindsey, are you aware of this study, that the KSA
Yes.
results?
Yeah. So this is our annual testing. When you look at one of the most brilliant pieces of legislation that passed before I came in was to require those scores to be on the websites of all of our school districts. And they do have that broken down in three different levels. They have the proficient reading, distinguished reading. And when you put proficient and reading together, the scores do look a little better. But for Fayette County, it's still in the 50% range. And obviously, if we don't, that's my biggest issue in the state. If we don't have kids who are reading at minimum proficiently, history's going to fail. Obviously, math is going to hurt too. There's a lot of reading and math, and science is going to fail. And if you look at our science levels at the high school, not just for Fayette, but across the state, it's in the single digits. So it hurts across the board when we're not really emphasizing the reading. So yes, we have poor scores right now, and there's a lot of factors to that, of course. And even in Fayette County, and that has a significant urban area and Jefferson County schools that has a very large urban area and a lot of economic issues, you're going to see those scores even are lower, which is so sad. That's the cycle of poverty we want to break. We want to get people to a position where they're going to be able to have success in their lives and come out of that. But if we are passing them through a system and they're continually at a failure or below level, it's going to be so much more of a challenge for them. So that's why so much of our emphasis needs to be in that classroom setting. Our money needs to be into resources that are helping kids learn those basic skills so that they can be successful. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of bloat at the administrative level and not quite sure how much of that ever reaches that student.
Lindsey, as it is, Fayette County Public Schools spend an average of $22,529 on each student. That number has grown 110% since 1990. That's with inflation baked in. The national average spending per student is $15,563. One thing I want to bring to the attention of those who are tuned in is that in 2016, in Fayette County schools, student enrollment was at 39,678. 2025 student enrollment is at 40,763. That's a 1,085 increase in students. In that same time period, there were 1,092 new employees that came on to the budget. Half of that, according to the chairman of the Joint Education Committee, Steve West, half of those new employees were teachers and assistants. The other half were administrators. So that's, by the way, one new employee for every student added. There have been more employees than students that have been added to that school district. Do you think that this explains maybe some of the budget being out of whack?
Well, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, are we really focusing on kids or are we a jobs program? And we see this even at the Kentucky Department of Education. Before the current commissioner, we saw an increase, almost triple staffing, tripled. So, yes, we have a big problem of pushing that administrative growth as if it's going to trickle down to the classroom. And of course, those are higher paying jobs. They have, more benefits, and it's very enticing for teachers to want those jobs. So they hope to work their way up to be able to have a better paying job. And we really have to look at where are we putting our emphasis? Is it on that classroom or is it continuing to grow that administrative level? And that's not proven to bring any results of measure to our scores and to student improvement.
Yeah. The Fayette County School Board recently met and they just approved an $827 million budget, and that's for the 25 school year. So huge budget, and the budget keeps growing year after year, but they continue to ask the legislature for more money. They came to you recently saying that we've got a $16 million budget shortfall. I think that was back in the spring. That didn't go over well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it didn't go over well, and they were trying to push through a tax on the citizens and went about it not following open meetings laws and caused a whole stink in their community, rightfully so. And now it turns out we find out the problem is even worse than that $16 million deficit. And apparently the contingency fund is not at the 2% that it's supposed to be, which is required by statute. So we're even further in the hole than that. And again, not to just pick on Fayette County, this is a problem in other districts. Fayette or Jefferson County in particular had $100 million deficit, and then we just discovered last week it's actually another 88 million on top of that. So there are big problems across the board. We have had a significant spending problem and administrative growth problem for a number of years, and trying to roll that back is really what we're going to be focusing on this next legislative session.
That's good. You mentioned the contingency fund. I believe last year it was at about $80 million, and the carryover was only about $14 million. And when the superintendent was asked why that was the case, I don't think he had a full answer. But one of the things he did respond to was that, and this is really important to the conversation, and that is that they're serving a large number of students that don't speak English at all. So they need more assistance in the classroom. They need more teachers. So you have that. The other part of the conversation is that you have students that just aren't prepared to learn. They're coming from terrible home lives. They're not fed properly. They're not cared for properly. And the schools end up being a parent in many cases. And especially when it comes to counselors, you have a greater demand on the counselors. Can our public schools, and this is a big question, this is the maybe from a 30,000-foot view, can our public schools flourish so long as the families are breaking down? Because the reality, and I
Mm,
think there's a lot of good people working in the public schools that really want what's best
absolutely.
for the kids. They're pouring their hearts out. It's hard to be a teacher.
Yeah.
And I don't want this program to come across as being anti-teacher. But can the public schools flourish so long as there's such a great demand on the teachers in the classroom and on administrators and counselors? Or do we just need to just kind of limp along and do the best that we can? How do you, is this something you've thought of? This is something I
Oh,
think of all the time.
absolutely. No, I think about it all the time when we've
Mhm,
watched the dissolution of the family unit over the last several decades, and
mhm,
it is absolutely putting a huge strain on so many of our government agencies. It's um, so how do you fix that problem? I mean, ultimately, it's an issue of the heart, and it's an issue of having different measures in place that people are held responsible for raising their children and not dependent on the government. And we've unfortunately built a system of dependency. So pulling that away, and then, I mean, we could talk about moral instruction and the different legislation we just passed to try and have an opportunity for students to have moral instruction in their schools or during the school day. So there are so many factors that contribute to the breakdown of the family unit, and then that extra burden, not just fiscally, on our systems, is really harmful. How do you bring the family unit back together?
yeah.
Jesus. Ultimately, that is the
Mm,
intention of getting married and having children, and staying married, and building on that. And when we see our churches become less involved in our government, then taking that role in the place of the churches, it makes for a very challenging society to be successful.
Hi, Richard Nelson here with the Commonwealth Policy Center. Have you found yourself frustrated and angry about the direction of the country? Maybe you're watching Fox News and you see what's happening in Congress or in other parts of the country. Let me encourage you to turn your frustration and energy into a positive direction. Have you considered running for local office? And listen to me for a minute. You can have a greater impact on local elections and on policy decisions if you serve in local government. School board, for example, they set curriculum decisions and tax policy. How about city council or fiscal court? These are very important elected offices where you can have a positive impact on. Consider running for local office. CPC is bringing candidate training events all across the state, and we'd love for you to join. If you've ever felt called to run or interested in running, come on and join us. You can find out more information at the Commonwealth Policy website at commonwealthpolicycenter.org. Go ahead and check it out, and we hope to see you in the fall.
I couldn't agree more. If you want to change behavior or change outcomes, you need to change the heart.
Yeah.
And I think that we can agree, at least on this program, that things aren't going so well for us in this society. When you look at a number of different areas as to how people are doing, young generations in particular, they're suffering from mental health decline. They're
Yes,
suffering from isolation, spending way too much time on screens and on social media,
absolutely.
and they're coming in. I think the number, by the way, of young people entering Kentucky colleges and universities, so these are graduating seniors in Kentucky going on to college, about half of them have need some kind of mental health support, whether
Hmm.
they need counseling or whether they're on some kind of various medications. They're coming in very broken, very hurting, and that
Yeah.
places an increased burden on higher ed. And quite frankly, it's going to inhibit, it's going to harm their learning capability. So there's so many things to connect here and so many things to consider.
Right.
But to your point, we need a change of heart. And Jesus is the only one who can do that. He truly gives us a new identity. He gives us a new purpose, a new way of doing life, a path forward. And
Hmm.
I think we can agree that we need that new path forward. We need
Yeah.
awakening in this nation and in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Lindsey, I want to go back to that committee hearing where DeAndre Liggins, the superintendent,
Demetrius Liggins.
I'm sorry, Thank you. You know what? I'm mixing up with a UK basketball. So, Demetrius, thank you for that correction. And I apologize, Demetrius, Mr. Liggins, I apologize for that if you're listening. So, you had a chance to question him, and you had in your committee chair a stack of credit card statements. And you were going
Mhm.
through, and you pointed out that the average credit card statement bill for Fayette County schools was $400,000. Also, while you were paging through there, you discovered huge expenses for
Mhm.
travel. One month was 127,000, I believe it
Yeah.
was. Another month was 80,000. You pointed out a trip to Australia, $7,000. A whole lot of travel expenses. Have you ever gotten a rationale as to why those expenses were so high? Were they justified? What were those for?
Well, a variety of different conferences and travel expenses. The interesting thing when you look at that, I wasn't counting up food reimbursements, any of those things. It was only travel and hotel. When you looked at August, August was $127,000 a month, and 52,000 of that was at the Galt House in downtown Louisville just for lodging. I don't know what was going on in August at the Galt House that you could spend $52,000 on. It must have been quite a conference. Some of the conferences were, the one to Australia was for a DEI conference. So they took 3 people there, and I actually did an open records request to get more specifics on that trip in particular. Um, because a $6,000 airfare is or 7,000, about 6,500. That's not typical. That's not a typical airfare to Australia. And sure enough, there were upgrades. Premium Plus, Comfort Plus. They upgraded those seats. Maybe not necessarily be first class, but they were definitely not your economy seats. So, looking at those different things, we pour so much into trainings and administrative, conferences that again don't ever make it down to the classroom. And we've seen ultimately what DEI and how ineffective it's been over the last several years as we're starting to uncover that. And we've been hopefully pulling that back at the post-secondary level, and we'll work on that next year at
Lindsay,
K-12.
can I interrupt? Can I interrupt? So you're telling me that Fayette County schools are still implementing and teaching and embracing DEI? I thought that was illegal.
Well, there's an executive order from the president, from President Trump, and they basically said, go pound sand, we're going to do it anyway.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens with that. I'm not sure how the federal government and the Department of Education is going to handle.
Yeah, just to be clear, the state legislature last session banned the teaching of DEI or DEI policies in higher ed, right?
Yes.
So Kentucky's
Yes.
colleges and universities illegal, did
Mhm.
not affect K through 12 education. What are you hearing from your colleagues? Do you expect a bill to come up that would stop DEI policies and teaching and
Yeah.
conferences and spending on it in K through 12?
Yeah, I hope so. The tricky thing, obviously, is the language of the bill. DEI is twisted and manipulated, called a lot of different things, and we're seeing that already in post-secondary. They're just naming it different things. So it's really getting at the heart of the definition of what they're doing and those discriminatory practices. And of course, they've tied in social emotional learning, which we've gotten a lot of federal funding for that, for those programs, and trauma-informed approaches. Those all, a lot of that really does fall under that same broad umbrella of critical theory. So it's a hard thing to nail down, but it's an incredible expense to our systems. The amount of employees that are hired, the amount of trainings they are going through, the programs that they fund. I've added up in Jefferson County schools about $30 million annual expenses in programming and about $4 million in salaries.
Wow.
So when you look at deficits of, 16 million, 188 million, whatever, that's a huge chunk of spending that's going to DEI. And what we were able to uncover in the post-secondary when we were working through that legislation, it absolutely has not been beneficial. It has not helped in student success rates in any measure. And I think we're seeing that now, and unfortunately in society as well. We're watching this absolute division of people by race and gender, and all of these horrible divisive concepts have really infiltrated every aspect of our society right now, and it's not helpful.
Lindsay, you brought up several different things. I think it'd be helpful to put definitions to these terms:
Yeah.
DEI, social emotional learning, trauma informed education. So, DEI, you just kind of gave a little bit of an explanation, but just for the average listener, DEI, people hear those words: diversity, equity,
Hmm.
inclusion. It sounds kind of nice, right? Warm, fuzzy.
Sure.
But tell us what does that actually mean?
It really comes from critical theory, which has been around for a long period of time. And we hear the term critical race theory, but really critical theory can be implemented in any type of structure. But it's putting an oppressor, there's an oppressor and there's the oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at things through those lenses.
Mm-hmm.
And then in order to offset that, you try to diversify as much as you can. You try to make equitable access to different things if they're coming in at a different economic standpoint. They want to make sure they have everything that they need in order to reach the same heights. And it really looks more at equal outcomes as opposed to equal
Mm-hmm.
opportunities. And of course, there's so many factors to someone's success. You can never have equal outcomes because we're all different. We were all created different with different skills, talents, backgrounds,
Yeah.
perspectives. It's just a moving target that they'll never hit.
Yeah.
And then of course the inclusive measure, honestly, if you don't agree with what they think needs to be included, you are 1,000% excluded in the
Mm-hmm.
strongest way. And we've
Mm-hmm.
watched that with the whole transgender movement and with, the acceptance of boys and girls bathrooms and boys and girls sports. And that's all wrapped in there. The whole issue of it started, I think, very strongly in my generation with tolerance.
Yeah.
We just have to be tolerant, which sounds like a great word. Well, we've done that so much so that we've shrugged back away from standing up for what's right and
Yeah.
standing up against the wrong. And it's really just diluted and weakened in any sense of truth in our society. So as you push these concepts, and
Yeah.
ultimately what we're seeing in a lot of the curriculum, unfortunately, even in the K-12, in the K through 5, is this casting white people in a bad light.
Yeah.
So it's really just reverse racism. As we know, that isn't going to solve any problem. You don't fix racism with a different version of racism, just
Right.
flip the other way.
Yeah.
It continues to make the problem and the divide even deeper.
Very good, very good. You did tell the Herald Leader, the Lexington Herald Leader,
Hmm.
asked you for some comments, and you said this to them, that Kentucky schools should be centers of learning and academic excellence, not arenas for political ideology, which is
Yeah.
essentially what DEI is and SEL and these other things.
Hmm.
And as we talked about earlier, Kentucky's kids are not performing well in areas
Yeah.
of reading and math and science. You had mentioned Jefferson County Public Schools as well. That this is not just a Fayette County problem, but
Hmm.
it's a problem with our public schools across the state. Jefferson County Public Schools, I think, even has worse performance student.
Yeah.
What would you like to add to? Well, here, I'll almost set it up this way. The state legislature has looked into the failure of JCPS schools, and there's been talk of breaking up the district. There's been talk of getting away, the state taking over the system.
Hmm.
Where are we with that? Where is that conversation right now? With the state's largest public school
Yeah.
system just doing not doing well.
Yeah, not doing well. You're looking at about 1 in 7 students are represented in the state of Kentucky in that school district. So it's a significant impact on Kentucky and Kentucky's future.
Mm-hmm.
And that it has unfortunately been producing a lot of failure. And even more, unfortunately, a lot of failure to the students who need it the most. They have the largest population of the economically disadvantaged in their district, and they're not being served, quite frankly, and we're setting them up for failure for their future. And Kentucky really can't afford that, and those students can't afford that, and it's unfair to them. As a legislative body, we are bound by our constitution to provide an efficient system of schools, and we are watching complete and total inefficiency at the county level. And there's definitely a very very strong argument to split that district. I think there's some measures that we can put into place. One that I've tried to push the last few years is to expand the size of the school board. There's only 7 members on the school board with near 100,000 students,
Mm-hmm.
versus you have small school districts where my daughter goes. There's 800 students and 5 members. So obviously, that could lighten the load and bring different perspectives into that decision making at the board level, in order to keep accountability, especially in our finances and hiring and firing the superintendents and things that are really important issues. So there are some things we can put in place. JCPS, in order to split it, it's going to take years to work that out. Obviously, there's just, you look at the buildings. What do we do with the buildings? How do you divide those lines by population, transportation, which is something they've been in the news the last couple of years struggling with. So it's a big, big problem, but it's an urgent problem, honestly, at this point. And I think it will serve Kentucky well. It will serve those students and those families well if they can be in an environment that's safe, that's providing a strong education for them, where our teachers are supported financially well, and we're able to pull back some of that administrative bloat that is a lot of times tying the teachers' hands with the requirements that they have.
So Lindsey, part of the administrative bloat is JCPS schools have a DEI department. I
Yeah.
believe, if I'm not mistaken, the budget was $60 million last year. John Marshall is the head of that department. And right after the election, last year's election, he tweeted out, or he put a post on X, where he said that a few young Black professionals and students called him and asked, what's the strategy moving forward? This is his response. Regardless of the rooms, classes, etc. you are in, know that the majority of whites could care less about you and have no issues harming you or yours. Do you know if John Marshall is still teaching or still involved with Jefferson County Public Schools?
He sure is.
How can
Yeah.
something this racist, essentially, if you're white, he just broad brushstroked an
Mhm.
entire race of people and
Right.
said they essentially hate you, they don't care about you, and they won't have a problem harming you. How is this acceptable?
It's absolutely not acceptable in my eyes, but unfortunately in theirs it is. He also makes $200,000 salary. But this is the prime example when I talk about the seeds that are being sown into our society
Yeah.
of hating one race or another. All you have to do is look 2 weeks ago at Irina Zarutska, and forgive me if I'm saying her name wrong, who was brutally murdered on a subway
Mm.
by an African American man who walked away saying, "I got that white girl."
Mm.
And then 5 other African Americans who saw it, or at least saw the blood splattering as he walked away, just got up and moved.
Mm.
That's where we are as a
Mm.
culture. And
Mhm.
when you have someone in a position of authority like John Marshall, who's telling students that white people want to harm them, it's absolutely unacceptable. And that is the problem with DEI. It has sown these seeds of anti-white racism, and it's wrong. It would be wrong in any direction that you spin that racism. And it's harmful to our country. It's harmful to having a strong Kentucky of united we stand. How can we stand together when we're sowing that type of division at that level with young children?
Just to correct, the diversity and equity program in Jefferson County Public Schools, it was $30 million, $30.02 million designated to them. I believe that was last year. And they do have an additional, so there's an additional $38.57 million that goes to the Racial Equity Fund. So they're well funded. The DEI program
Yeah.
there is well funded. And students really aren't learning. Jefferson County students
Yeah.
are underperforming and they're struggling, and we're failing them, Lindsey.
We are.
This generation is failing them. Those who, and I think we need to take responsibility as a whole. We should work for the best schools and work for outcomes that are going to help prepare our young people for life. And too many kids are falling through the cracks and they're not
Absolutely.
succeeding. Lindsey, we're just about out of time, but could you add any other things that we could look forward to in the next legislative session besides pushing back? Did I hear you correctly? You're going to file a bill, or you're looking at a bill that would push back against K through 12 DEI?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be refiling the bill that I had filed last session. I can't remember the number off the top of my head right now. So yeah, I will be pushing for that again, and I'm going to push a little bit further and try to remove the DEI elements that are within all of our public agencies where we're hiring and firing based off of race, and affirmative action is still on the books in Kentucky, and we know the Supreme Court has shot that down. So we need to clean up the books, and we need to pull this stuff out. We need to get back to merit-based systems and really reward people and prime them and prep them to earn those rewards based on merit and not based on the color of their skin.
Yeah.
So I'll be working hard on that again next session.
Good. Thank you for your work on that. And thank you for joining us on the Commonwealth Matters. God bless you.
Thank you so much for having me.